Hi everyone and welcome along. We are well and truly into autumn now, so I'm going to paint some of my autumnal favourites for you. Grab your paints and let's get started. So I'm taking inspiration from nature primarily for our autumn favourites today. So I'm just going to be painting them in quite simply. I'll be doing minimal pencil drawing, but we will always get a bit of a guide. So for example, I'm going to begin with an oak leaf. An oak leaf that's changing colour in autumn. So I've drawn a pencil curve and now I'm going to use that as the central guide for my leaf lines. So for this oak leaf, what I'm doing is I'm just beginning with some sort of brown orangey tones, and I am creating this lovely sort of oak leaf wobbly shape, following along the guide given to me by this pencil line. And I've gone down to green gold and now down to sap green as this leaf clings on to the last signs of life. And that's one of the beautiful highlights of autumn, when the leaves start to transition like that. Now let's paint in a little sprig of berries. So actually on my quick fix recently we painted some really nice simple berries. Well, here is another rather nice approach for those berries. So I've got some Alizarin Crimson here, and I'm using my size 2/10 brush to paint in this little sort of floating cluster of circles. They're sort of rough little circles, and in painting round and leaving out that little bit of unpainted space, we create a nice bit of shine on the berry. And now I've got some burnt sienna, a little bit of Paynes Grey, making us a lovely dark woody colour. And with the same brush I am going to begin with a sort of gnarly little stalk. That was just by angling the brush quite low to the page, and now I'm just allowing a little less of it to touch the page so that we get a slightly thinner line. We all see all sorts of berries in autumn, and they're all just such fun to paint, so I highly recommend you have a little look. Okay, what shall we paint next? Well, let's paint a conker. So the horse chestnut trees create these amazing horse chestnuts that are otherwise known as conkers. So I've got burnt sienna here. I'm just coming up to the top corner to fill this one in, and rather simply I have used the side of my brush to squish down one side, and then the other just coming around with the tip, and honestly that's pretty much it. A conker is, we'll get a little bit of darkness there, and then a tiny bit of colour in the middle. But they are these wonderful shiny brown, we'll put in another one here I think, nuts that end up being used by children in the UK. I don't know if this is a thing around the world as well, where you string them up and then you play conkers with each other. You try and hit and smash each other's conker. Okay, so that's a little bit of fun. Another one I quite like, let's do a little log slice. So I've got yellow ochre again, and I'm going to just paint in a bit of a swirl. You're not going to see a huge amount of detail on that whilst it's just yellow ochre. And now whilst it's still wet, I'm going to use the fine tip of my size 2 brush to just add a few more swirls, and then as it just slowly dries, I can use just a little bit more brown mixed with burnt sienna this time, and I can come back in and create a few more rings on that tree. And soon it will be dry enough for us to paint in the gnarly bark around the edge. So here I come now with sort of rough little brush strokes around the edge. To make some nice gnarly bark. I know that we have trees and log slices all through the year, but just don't you feel in autumn you notice them a bit more? Few dabs of Paynes Grey, and that looks rather nice. Now I'm going to go up to my oak leaf here, and with a bit of brown on my rigger brush I am going to paint in a nice line there, and then a few fine lines just out to the little loops on the leaf. Now another thing I think a lot of people forget about in autumn is actually it's harvest time, isn't it? It's harvest festival. So I'm going to paint in a nice bit of ear of corn down in the corner here, because we want to try and fill up this page. So yellow ochre with a nice long slender line, and then now I'm just going to dab the brush in a sort of herringbone fashion, and it's really quite rough. And then I can take my little size 4/10 and a bit of burnt sienna, and I can just tidy that up a little bit. Okay, what next? Let's put in a mushroom or two. So I've found so many of these on my dog walks recently. So I'm just doing a little top and a stem. And the thing is, there are so many different types, but essentially they all follow the same premise, that you've got this sort of domed top and then a stem that sort of tapers off. So a little bit of yellow ochre, and then I'll take a bit of Paynes Grey. And then it's kind of up to you what kind of colours you want to do the tops in. I mean, I've seen everything this year. It is interesting. I'm not a very observant person, and I've really had to train myself to become more observant, particularly of the subtle changes in nature. And I don't know if it's just because I've become more into painting nature these past few years, but I'm just spotting things more. So we've seen so many little mushrooms and toadstools of all different sorts. And it turns out that our next door neighbour actually brought us some field mushrooms from our field next door that are actually edible, which is really exciting. So we actually had a few in an omelette for our tea the other day, which I would never have the confidence to actually identify mushrooms. I'll leave that to the experts. Okay, so a few speckles on top. They look rather nice. And then we'll do one. So I'm going to begin with a bit of orange on the bottom. And then build up to a bit of red. And then I'm going to try and leave some gaps for some white spots for a very simplistic take on one that's called a fly agaric, which I've learnt about recently, but I'm going to make my red a bit more concentrated at the top. If you work fairly quickly, you can get these all blended rather nicely. And I've learnt recently that mushrooms have these little, almost like skirts, where when the mushroom properly grows out, yeah, definitely a result of me becoming a bit more observant, noticing these things. Okay, we'll let that dry a little bit and then add a bit more detail. So just to finish off that little mushroom, I've got some of the Paynes Grey on my brush. I'm just adding it to the underside of there, and a little bit of texture, and then just a little bit underneath. And there we go. Right, we're going to paint a little bird now. We're going to do a house sparrow. So I'm going to take this grey, and I'm just going to go for it, I think. So we're going to do a little breast there. So a sort of curving shape. And we've got a little head. And then they've got a beautiful sort of brown wing with little flecks of white in, and then a slightly sort of greyed off tail. And just by sort of keeping your brush strokes nice and simple, we can get a really nice little bird shape. And from what you don't paint, you can then achieve a really nice, there we go, get that up a bit higher, there we go. You can achieve a really nice little detailed bird, even though it's really sort of simplistic with loose watercolour. And then we'll get the legs in. Remember, the legs sit really quite far back on the body. Then the beak comes right onto the face. And then we'll just allow that to dry and pop in a little eye once we're done. So we've got a nice little thing. So now I'm just going to add in, just in the gaps, a few more simple little leaves, because this is what our page is all about, just a nice little sort of celebration of autumn. So we'll pop in 2 there. And you can just have some fun with this really, in the colours you choose. Have your leaves gone fully red yet? Or are they still in a stage of transition? Green gold is a great colour to use if you're painting a series of autumn leaves that are just in the transitional phase. Okay, our little sparrow is dry, so I'm going to take some Mars Black and just leave a little bit of unpainted shine, and also just a little bit on the beak. And the beaks come right into the face of a bird. I think that's something that a lot of people forget when they're painting birds. Okay, let's keep going. So I think we've got to have some kind of squash or pumpkin. So we'll pop one up here, and I'm just going to use my size 2 brush in painting in segments here. What's quite nice is they don't have to be all sort of perfect and evenly shaped, but just in creating a little bit of this sort of unpainted space, you suddenly get your sections. And then I think I'll actually get a bit of green gold in there. You get a nice twisty little stalk going on. Okay, we're filling up our space really nicely. I think if we've got this corn, we may as well have a little harvest mouse. Very, very sweet little thing. So let's have a little mound for the body and a little bit of a sort of shape at the end for the head. So I'm using yellow ochre, nice and dilute. Just getting a little bit more on the shape, just scribbling it in a little bit, even though it's sort of all fairly fairly pale. We'll get a bit little ear. That's not going to quite be dry enough yet. So we've got our little shape. The harvest mouse is one of the only mice whose tail they can actually sort of use to cling on to things, which I think is very cool. So I'll just get a bit of permanent rose mixed in with my ochre colours. There we go. Okay, we'll let that one dry, and then we can pop in, oh, what else shall we have? Maybe a little moth, a little autumnal moth. So we've got a little body. Blend down in a little thorax and a tiny little head. And again, we'll just let that dry, and then we'll place in some wings. Each time I'm waiting for something to dry, I just paint in an extra little sprig of berries or something. And so too can you, really. Okay, so I'm going to paint in a sort of Isabella tiger moth because the colours are lovely. So I'm using a bit of yellow, bit of orange, and just using the brush to create those lovely wing shapes, and just sort of embracing the little bit of unpainted space that's coming there. Quite like that. And then there's another one. There's another wing in there. And then we can just allow that to dry. And then we could put in some detail. My little field mouse, no, my harvest mouse, beg your pardon. Need a few little feet. And then I think the ears actually are a little bit further back, they're more up here. There we go. And then some beautiful big eyes. And then the rigger brush, perfect for some nice slender whiskers that will just use some of the colours we've got here. And then I think we've probably just got room for one last little autumn leaf maybe. So we'll just curl in that stem. And then I'm going to paint in some nice serrated edge leaves, which are quite cool to learn. So tapered line, and then just use your brush to create nice little lines, and then I'll get some orange in there because it's an autumn leaf. Do that again. One line, then fill them up down the side, then tiny bit of a gap in the middle if you can. Autumn is just so full of lovely, colourful things to paint. If you haven't picked up a paintbrush yet this year, you've had a busy year, then I highly recommend you go and have a look. So there we have a page filled with my autumn favourites. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. If you're sharing your work on social media, then tag us at the Winton Paper Co on Instagram. I'd love to see your paintings. Okay, until next time, bye!